He didn't raise his voice when he told her to leave. Ethan simply dragged her suitcase across the polished marble floor and shoved it out into the rain like it was trash. "Take your things and go. You've been living off me long enough." Behind him, his new partner leaned against the doorway, watching with quiet satisfaction, while his mother stood inside, arms folded. Ava didn't argue. She just stood there, soaked, staring at the house she had quietly paid for, and wondering how he could be so certain it was his. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 years earlier, everything had looked very different. The rain hit harder now, bouncing off the driveway in sharp, uneven bursts. Ava didn't move. Water soaked through her coat, her hair clung to her face, and still, she stood exactly where Ethan had left her, as if stepping away would mean accepting something she wasn't ready to accept yet. Inside the house, the lights were warm, golden, comfortable, the way they always had been. Ethan turned back toward the doorway, already losing interest. Olivia said something softly to him, her voice low, amused. Ava couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She had learned, over the past year, how to read what people said without speaking. Olivia tilted her head slightly, eyes scanning Ava from head to toe, not cruel in an obvious way. Worse, dismissive. Like Ava didn't belong in the same frame. Ethan followed that gaze. "Honestly," he muttered, "more to Olivia than to Ava. I don't know why she's still standing there." "Because this is still my home," Ava thought. But she didn't say it. That was the part Ethan had never understood about her. Silence didn't mean weakness. It meant control. Margaret, his mother, stepped forward just enough to be seen, her expression tight with disapproval. "If you have any dignity left," she said, "you'll take your things and leave without making a scene." Ava met her eyes for a brief second. There was something almost curious in her gaze. Not hurt, not anger, just clarity. Then she looked away. The suitcase lay half open in a shallow puddle, one corner already darkened by water. Ava walked down the steps slowly, each movement deliberate, unhurried. She crouched and closed the zipper. Brushing rainwater from the leather with the side of her hand, she recognized the suitcase now. Ethan had bought it 2 years ago, proud of himself for finding something high-end at a discount. He had never noticed the original invoice, never asked why it had been reimbursed the same week. Ava lifted it without effort. Behind her, the front door creaked slightly. Ethan hadn't gone back inside after all. He was watching her again. "Just so we're clear," he called out, his tone sharper now. "Don't come back asking for anything. I'm done funding this situation." Ava paused, the suitcase handle in her hand. Funding. The word lingered. She turned just enough to face him, rain dripping from her chin. "I won't," she said quietly. It was the first thing she'd said all night. Something about her tone made Ethan frown. Not defiant, not emotional, just certain. Like she knew something he didn't. Olivia shifted beside him. "Ethan," she murmured, a hint of impatience creeping in. "You don't owe her an explanation." "I'm not explaining," he replied, though his voice lost some of its earlier confidence. "I'm just making sure she understands." Ava almost smiled. Understands what? That he thought this house was his? That the life he was protecting had been built entirely on his own effort? That she had somehow been carried? The rain softened slightly, turning into a steady, quiet fall. Ava stepped back from the driveway, suitcase in hand. The street beyond the gate was dim, lit only by a flickering street lamp. She didn't rush, didn't look back again, because looking back would invite something, an argument, a reaction, a version of herself she had outgrown. Inside her coat pocket, her phone vibrated once. She didn't check it immediately. Instead, she walked. One step, then another. Only when she reached the sidewalk did she stop shifting the suitcase beside her leg. She pulled the phone out slowly, shielding the screen from the rain. A single message, from a name saved without any title. "We need your confirmation before tomorrow's board vote. Call me as soon as you can." Ava stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it again. Behind her, inside the house, laughter rose faintly. Olivia's voice. Light. Easy. As if nothing important had just happened. Ava closed her eyes briefly. 3 years. 3 years of choosing not to correct him, of letting him believe he was the one carrying everything, of waiting to see who he would become when he thought no one was watching. She picked up the suitcase again. The pavement stretched ahead, slick and empty. This wasn't the end, not even close, but it was the moment everything finally became clear. And for the first time that night, something shifted inside her. Not pain, not anger, but decision. Her phone vibrated again. This time she didn't ignore it. She answered the call. "Yes," she said calmly, stepping into the darkness beyond the gate. "We'll proceed tomorrow." She hung up before the other person could say anything more. Behind her, Ethan closed the door. He thought he had just gotten rid of a burden. Ava adjusted her grip on the suitcase and kept walking, because what he had really done was walk away from something he had never understood, and he had no idea how much it was about to cost him. The rain had slowed to a thin, steady drizzle by the time Ava reached the corner. The street was quiet, lined with identical houses that all looked more confident than the one she had just left behind. She didn't stop walking until she reached the edge of the block, where a single black sedan sat idling beneath a flickering streetlight. She hadn't called for it, but she wasn't surprised it was there. The driver stepped out the moment he saw her, holding an umbrella over her without asking. He didn't look at her clothes, or the water dripping from her suitcase, or the fact that she had just been thrown out of her own home. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "where would you like to go?" Ava paused for half a second. Carter. The name she had been using for years now. The name Ethan thought was her real one. "Downtown," she replied. "The usual place." The driver nodded and opened the back door. She slid inside, setting the suitcase beside her. The leather left a faint trail of water across the seat, but the driver didn't comment. He never did. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving the quiet neighborhood behind. Ava leaned her head back and closed her eyes. 3 years. It was strange how quickly something that once felt like a life could turn into something that looked like a mistake. But she didn't feel regret. Not yet. Her phone buzzed again in her hand, the same contact. She opened the message this time. "We're finalizing tomorrow's agenda. Your vote will determine the outcome." She stared at the words for a moment before typing a short reply. "I'll be there." No hesitation. No explanation. The car merged onto the highway, and the city skyline rose ahead of her, sharp and bright against the dark sky. Ava watched it through the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. To anyone else, she probably looked like a woman who had just been thrown out of her house by her husband, and in a way, she was. But that wasn't the whole truth. Not even close. Across town, Ethan stood in the kitchen with a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at nothing in particular. The house felt different, too quiet. Olivia had gone upstairs an hour ago, after a few comments about how exhausting the evening had been. His mother had retreated to the guest room, muttering something about finally correcting a long overdue mistake. And now he was alone. He took another sip. It burned more than usual. He told himself it was relief, that getting Ava out of the house had been necessary, that things would finally move forward now, without the constant tension, without her quiet presence making him feel like he was being watched. Because that was what had always unsettled him the most. Not what she said, but what she didn't. The way she would look at him sometimes, like she understood something he didn't. He set the glass down harder than he meant to. "She was holding you back," Olivia said from behind him. He hadn't heard her come down. Ethan turned. She was leaning against the doorway now, arms crossed loosely, her expression softer than it had been earlier. "You know that, right?" she added. He nodded, a little too quickly. "Of course I know that." Olivia stepped closer. "Then stop acting like you just lost something important." "I didn't," he said, but the words didn't land the way he expected. Olivia studied him for a moment, then reached for the glass and took a sip herself. "Good," she said, "because tomorrow matters more." Ethan frowned. "Tomorrow?" "The meeting," she said, "the expansion deal. You've been talking about it for weeks." "Right." "The deal," he exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, tomorrow's big." Olivia smiled, just slightly. "It's more than big. If this goes through, you're not just a senior manager anymore. You're in the room. You finally get to make real decisions." He felt something tighten in his chest. That was what he had been working toward, what all of this had been for. "Exactly," he said. Olivia handed him back the glass. "Then maybe tonight was necessary," she added. "You can't move forward if you're still tied to something that doesn't fit." Something that doesn't fit. Ethan nodded again, slower this time. Yes, he said. That's exactly it. The car came to a stop in front of a quiet building downtown. No sign out front, no obvious branding, just a clean glass entrance and a security desk inside. Ava stepped out, the driver holding the umbrella steady above her. Do you need anything else? He asked. No, she said. That's all. He nodded once and returned to the car. Inside, the lobby was warm and quiet. The man at the front desk stood up the moment he saw her. Good evening, he said, his tone respectful but controlled. We weren't expecting you tonight, I know, Ava replied. Is Mr. Langford still here? The man hesitated for a fraction of an Yes, he's in the conference room. I'll go up, she said. No questions, no delay. The elevator ride was silent. Ava watched the numbers climb, her reflection sharper now in the mirrored walls. She looked exactly the same as she had an hour ago, and yet everything had shifted. When the doors opened, the hallway beyond was empty. The conference room door was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the corridor. Ava pushed it open. 3 people sat inside, mid-discussion. All of them turned at once. The man at the head of the table stood immediately. Ava, he said, surprise flashing across his face. We thought you'd join remotely. I changed my mind, she said. His expression shifted quickly, from surprise to something closer to concern. Are you all right? Ava set her wet suitcase just inside the door. I'm fine, she said. Let's continue. The others exchanged brief glances, then sat back down. Langford remained standing for a moment longer, studying her. The vote tomorrow, he said carefully, depends on your position. I'm aware. And your personal situation won't affect your decision? Ava met his eyes. No, she said. Her voice was calm, certain, controlled, the kind of certainty that didn't come from impulse. It came from knowing exactly where the power was. Langford nodded slowly, then gestured to the document spread across the table. Then we need your final approval on this structure, he said. If you sign, the acquisition goes through. Ava stepped forward, her gaze dropping to the papers. She recognized every line, her clause, every implication, including one detail that made her pause. A small section, buried near the end, a subsidiary name, one she knew very well. Her fingers hovered just above the page, because if this went through tomorrow, Ethan wouldn't just be attending that meeting. He would be walking into a room where every decision had already been made without him, and he still believed he was about to take control. Ava didn't sign immediately. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the document, tracing the margin without touching the ink. The room was quiet again, the earlier discussion now replaced by a tense stillness that no one seemed willing to break. Langford watched her carefully. Is there a concern? No, she said, just confirming something. She leaned slightly closer, scanning the section again. The subsidiary name was small, almost forgettable unless you knew what you were looking for. Most people wouldn't notice it. Most people didn't understand how structures like this were layered. But Ava did, because she had approved the original formation of that entity 2 years ago. She straightened and picked up the pen. I'm fine with the structure, she said, but I want one adjustment. The others exchanged glances. What kind of adjustment? One of them asked. Ava tapped the page reporting line. It needs to stay independent until after the transition period. Langford's brows drew together. That's not how it was proposed. I know, she replied, but it's how it's going to work. Her tone wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. There was a quiet authority in the way she spoke, something that didn't come from title or position, but from certainty. Langford held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we can revise that. Good, she signed. The pen moved smoothly across the page, her signature quick and no hesitation this time. One of the others shifted in his seat. Once this goes through tomorrow, the leadership team changes. There will be adjustments, I'm aware, Ava said. And Ethan Clark is positioned to benefit from that, he added almost cautiously. Ava didn't look up. I know, she said again. What she didn't say was that she also knew exactly how temporary that position would be. Ethan barely slept. By morning, the house felt unfamiliar, not because anything had physically changed, but because something invisible had shifted overnight. The silence lingered longer than it should have. The rooms felt bigger, emptier. He told himself it was a good thing. A clean break. That was what people needed sometimes. Still, he avoided looking at the front hallway where Ava's shoes used to sit. Avoided opening the closet where her clothes had been. Avoided thinking about how little space she had actually taken up. Olivia was already dressed when he came downstairs, scrolling through her phone at the kitchen counter. "You're up early," she said without looking at him. "Big day," he replied. She nodded. "Exactly. So let's not waste it." He poured himself coffee, stronger than usual. His hands were steady, but his thoughts weren't. "You're going straight to the office?" she asked. "Yeah. I want to be there before the others." "Good." She set her phone down. "You need to be in control of that room the moment you walk in." He almost smiled. That was what he liked about Olivia. She understood ambition. She spoke the same language, unlike Ava. Ava had always seemed distant from it, like she didn't care about status or recognition, like she was playing a different game entirely. He pushed the thought away. "That's the plan," he said. Back downtown, Ava stood in front of a tall window, watching the city wake up below her. She hadn't gone home, not to that house, not to anywhere that could be traced back to Ethan. Instead, she had taken a quiet swite in a building her name wasn't publicly attached to, one of many, simple, clean, private. Her suitcase rested in the corner, still damp at the edges. She hadn't unpacked, there was no need, her phone rang. This time the name was different. Ava, the voice on the other end said, "Calm, professional. We reviewed the final documents. Everything is in place. Good. There's one more thing," he added. "Your husband's name came up during the internal review." She didn't react immediately. "In what context?" "He's listed as a key participant in the post-acquisition integration team. He's expecting a promotion once the deal closes." Ava turned slightly, her reflection catching in the glass. "Is that an issue?" she asked. "That depends on you," the voice replied. "We can proceed as planned or we can adjust." Adjust. Such a simple word for something that could completely redirect a person's life. "Not yet," she said. A pause. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She ended the call before he could ask anything else. Because this wasn't about destroying Ethan. Not yet, it was about letting him believe. Letting him step forward. Letting him take exactly the position he thought he had earned. Only then would it matter. The office building buzzed with quiet energy when Ethan arrived. Conversations were lower than usual, movements sharper, more deliberate. Everyone knew today was important. He walked through the lobby with confidence, nodding to a few familiar faces. People greeted him differently now, with a little more respect, a little more attention. He had earned that, or at least, that was what he believed. In the elevator, he checked his reflection, adjusted his tie, smoothed the front of his jacket, controlled the room. That was what Olivia had said, and he would. The conference floor was already active when he stepped out. Assistants moving quickly, doors opening and closing, voices carrying just enough tension to remind everyone what was at stake. He spotted one of the senior directors near the entrance. "Morning," Ethan said. The man nodded, but his expression was off, less confident than usual, more reserved. "You're in early," the director said. "Didn't want to miss anything." A brief pause. "You won't," the man replied. Ethan frowned slightly, but didn't press. He pushed open the conference room door. Inside, the table was already set, documents neatly arranged, screens ready, seats assigned, and at the far end of the table, a folder lay slightly apart from the others. Thicker, marked, with a name printed clearly across the top. Ethan stepped closer, curiosity pulling him in. He didn't recognize the company listed beneath it, but something about it felt familiar. He reached out and flipped it open, and froze. Because the address listed inside was his home. Ethan's fingers tightened on the edge of the folder. For a moment, he thought he had misread it, that there had to be some mistake. The address printed on the page was exact. Street number, zip code, even the unit designation matched his house. No, his house with Ava. He flipped the page again, scanning faster now. The document wasn't a standard briefing. It wasn't even part of the main acquisition summary. It was attached. Supplemental. Ownership structure. A legal overview of asset allocation tied to a holding entity he didn't recognize. Something wrong? The voice behind him made him straighten immediately. He turned, closing the folder halfway without thinking. "No," Ethan said, just reviewing. The senior director from earlier stepped into the room, his eyes flicking briefly to the file in Ethan's hands. Not curious, not surprised, Just aware. You'll want to wait for the full presentation, the man said. Everything will be explained. Ethan forced a nod. Right. The director didn't move right away. He held Ethan's gaze for a second longer than necessary, then added, "It's more complex than it looks." Then he walked away. Ethan stared down at the folder again. More complex than it looks. That wasn't reassuring. He closed it fully this time and set it back where he found it. The urge to keep reading was strong, but something about the way the others were acting made him hesitate. This wasn't information he was supposed to interpret alone. Not yet. He stepped back from the table, trying to reset his focus. Today was about the deal. The promotion. The next step. Not paperwork anomalies. He checked the time. 10 minutes until the meeting. Enough to breathe, enough to get control back. Ava arrived through a different entrance, not the main lobby, not the elevators Ethan used. A quieter corridor that required a badge most employees didn't even know existed. She walked with the same steady pace as the night before, her expression calm, unreadable. The damp suitcase was gone now, replaced by a simple leather folder tucked under her arm. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. The security officer at the checkpoint simply nodded and stepped aside. "Good morning, Miss Carter." "Morning." She didn't slow down. Inside, the executive hallway was already active, but the energy here felt different, less frantic, more controlled. People spoke in lower tones. Doors opened only when necessary. Ava passed 2 assistants who immediately straightened when they saw her. "Conference room is ready," one of them said quietly. "They're waiting for you upstairs." "I know," Ava replied. She pressed the elevator button and waited. Her phone buzzed once in her hand. "Langford, everything's set," he said when she answered. "They're all here. I'm on my way. There's been some interest in the property file," he added carefully. Ava's reflection in the elevator doors didn't change. "Who? Clark," Langford said. "Of course." Ava exhaled slowly, not out of frustration, but acknowledgement. "He saw it?" "Briefly. Good." There was a pause on the other end. "You expected that?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "Once this starts, there's no pulling it back quietly. I'm not trying to." The elevator doors opened. "I'll see you inside," she said and ended the call. Ethan took his seat near the middle of the table. Not the head, not yet, but closer than he had ever been before. That mattered. The room filled quickly. Directors, senior partners, legal advisors. Faces he recognized and some he didn't. Conversation stayed low, focused, professional, controlled. But something still felt off. Subtle, but there. He noticed the way people glanced toward the door more often than usual. The way conversations paused mid-sentence, then resumed with forced normalcy, like they were waiting for someone. He leaned slightly toward the man beside him. "Is there an external stakeholder coming in?" The man hesitated, then gave a non-committal shrug. "Something like that. Not helpful." Ethan leaned back in his chair, masking the flicker of irritation. He was supposed to be part of this. Not guessing, not waiting. At the front of the room, the main screen lit up. The acquisition overview appeared, clean and structured, numbers, projections, timelines. Familiar territory. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself in it. This was what he understood. This was where he was strong. The presentation began. Ava stood just outside the door. She could hear the faint murmur of voices inside. The rhythm of a meeting already in motion. Structured. Predictable. For a moment, she didn't move. Not because she was unsure, because she was choosing. 3 years of silence. 3 years of observation. 3 years of watching Ethan build confidence on a foundation he never questioned, and now he was inside that room, believing he was about to step into something bigger. She could let it play out a little longer. Let him speak. Let him position himself. Let him show exactly who he had become. Or she could end it now. Ava adjusted the folder in her hand. There was no anger in her decision. No need clarity. She reached for the door handle. Inside, Ethan was speaking now. Confident. Measured. Outlining integration strategies like he had already secured his place. Some of the directors listened, some didn't. Ava pushed the door open. The room shifted instantly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Conversation stopped. Eyes moved. Ethan's voice cut off mid-sentence. He turned, and for a brief second, something in his expression changed. Confusion, then disbelief, because they didn't look like someone who had been thrown out of her house the night before. She looked composed, prepared, like she belonged there, which made no sense. Not to him. Not in this room. She stepped inside, calm, unhurried, her gaze moving across the table once before settling. Not on Ethan. On the seat at the far end, the one no one else had taken. Langford stood immediately. "Good morning," he said. Not casual, not equal. Respectful. Ava gave a small nod. "Let's begin," she said, and Ethan realized too late that this meeting was not his to control. The room didn't recover right away. It didn't erupt into confusion or questions. It simply stalled. Conversations died mid-thought. Papers stopped moving. Even the air felt heavier, like something unseen had just shifted the balance of the entire space. Ava walked to the far end of the table and took the empty seat. No one told her to. No one questioned it. Because they all understood exactly what that seat meant. Ethan didn't. He stayed frozen for a second too long before forcing himself back into motion. His hand tightened against the edge of his chair as he slowly sat down again, his eyes fixed on her. This didn't make sense. Not the way she walked in. Not the way Langford had stood up for her. Not the way the room had gone quiet. Ava didn't look at him. She opened her folder, set it neatly in front of her, and nodded once toward Langford. "Continue," she said. The presentation resumed, but the tone had changed. Before, it had been structured, controlled, predictable. Now, it was careful, measured, every word chosen with precision. Ethan tried to follow the numbers on the screen, but his attention kept drifting back to her, to the way she sat. Straight-backed, composed. Like she had always belonged in rooms like this, which was impossible. He had spent 3 years with her. He would have known, wouldn't he? "Let's move to the integration phase," Langford said, clicking to the next slide. "Leadership alignment will be critical." Ethan forced himself to focus. This was his part, his opportunity. He leaned forward slightly, clearing his throat. "If we're talking about integration, the key risk is operational overlap. We need centralized control early, decentralized," Ava said without raising her voice. The interruption cut cleanly through the room. Ethan stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward her. She didn't look at him. She was still watching the screen, her tone calm, almost conversational. "The structure you're proposing assumes immediate consolidation," she continued. "That creates instability. The divisions need to remain independent through the transition." Ethan blinked, thrown off balance. "That's not efficient." "It's controlled," she replied. Now she turned, just slightly, enough for her eyes to meet his. For a brief second, something passed between them. Not anger, not accusation, recognition. "You're optimizing for speed," she said. "I'm optimizing for retention." The room stayed silent. Because they weren't arguing like a husband and wife. They were speaking like two people with very different levels of authority. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest. "With all due respect, this isn't theoretical. I've been working on this deal for weeks, I know," Ava said. No edge, no challenge. Just acknowledgement, which somehow made it worse. "Then you understand why this matters," he pressed. "I do," she replied, "which is why the current structure stands, not a suggestion, a decision." Langford cleared his throat lightly. "We've already incorporated that adjustment into the final model." Ethan turned toward him sharply. "Since when?" Langford hesitated. "Just for a moment. Since last night." Last night. Ethan's grip tightened on the table. While he was throwing her out, she had been here, making decisions. He looked back at Ava, something sharper now cutting through his confusion. "What exactly is your role in this?" he asked. The question hung in the air, too direct, too late. Ava didn't answer immediately. She closed the folder in front of her, her fingers resting lightly on top of it. "Today isn't about roles," she said. "It's about outcomes." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's not." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ethan leaned back slightly, forcing himself to stay controlled. "Then maybe someone else can clarify." Silence. No one spoke. Not Langford. Not the directors. No one. And that silence said more than any explanation could have. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a gap he hadn't even known existed. The presentation moved forward, but Ethan barely heard it. Numbers blurred. Charts lost meaning. Every few seconds, his attention snapped back to Ava, to the way people deferred to her, to the way decisions shifted around her without being questioned, to the way she didn't need to raise her voice, because no one was challenging her. Not really. He thought back to the folder, the address, the subsidiary. A thought began to form. Unwelcome, unfinished, impossible, unless. He cut it off. No, that didn't make sense either. Before we move to the vote, Langford said, bringing the room back into focus, there's one final item to review. He reached for a document and slid it across the table. Not to Ethan, to Ava. She opened it without hesitation. Ethan watched closely now. This mattered. Whatever this was, it mattered. Langford continued, this pertains to asset alignment post-acquisition. Specifically, residential holdings tied to the subsidiary structure. Residential. Ethan's pulse ticked up. Ava scanned the page, then nodded once. Proceed, she said. Langford looked toward the rest of the room. As part of the transition, properties held under these entities will be reclassified. Ownership will remain unchanged, but control rights will be clarified. Ethan leaned forward again. What properties? Langford didn't answer him. He looked at Ava. Ava closed the document slowly. Then, for the first time since she entered the room, she spoke directly to Ethan. Sit back, she said quietly. Not sharp, not loud, but final. Ethan froze, because it wasn't just what she said. It was how easily she said it. Like she had every right to, like she always had. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Because something deep in his instincts told him that pushing right now would be a mistake. Ava turned back to Langford. You can finalize the language, she said. Langford nodded immediately. Understood. No hesitation. No discussion. Just compliance. Ethan felt it then. Not confusion, not even anger. Something heavier, something colder. Loss of control. The meeting adjourned 10 minutes later. People stood, gathered their things, spoke in low tones again. But this time, the conversations were different. Focused, directed, and not centered around him. Ethan's stayed seated for a moment longer, watching Ava as she closed her folder. She didn't rush, didn't look around, didn't acknowledge anyone else. When she stood, Langford moved toward her immediately, speaking in a tone Ethan couldn't quite hear. Respectful. Again. Always respectful. Ethan pushed his chair back and stood. Ava, he said. She paused. Just for a second. Then turned. Up close, nothing about her looked different. Same face. Same calm expression. Same woman he had lived with for 3 years. And yet, what is going on? He asked. Direct. No room for deflection. Ava held his gaze. You'll understand soon, she said. That's not good enough. It will have to be. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. That house. She didn't let him finish. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. Be careful what you assume belongs to you, she said. Quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. Then she turned and walked past him. No hesitation, no explanation. Ethan stood there, the words settling into something heavier than he wanted to admit, because for the first time he wasn't sure what he actually owned, and for the first time he started to realize he might have just lost something far bigger than a marriage. Ethan didn't follow her, not immediately. He stood in the middle of the conference room as people moved around him. Voices low, conversations resuming without him. It wasn't subtle anymore. The shift was complete. He wasn't the center of the room. He wasn't even part of it. Someone brushed past his shoulder without apology. Another avoided eye contact entirely. The director who had greeted him earlier was now deep in conversation with Langford, barely glancing in his direction. Ethan felt it clearly now. He had been repositioned. Without explanation, without warning, he grabbed his folder and walked out. The hallway felt colder than before, too quiet, too controlled. Ethan moved faster than usual, his mind running ahead of him, trying to piece together something that made sense. Ava, the meeting, the folder, the house, the way Langford had looked at her, the way no one had answered his question. None of it aligned, unless... He stopped walking, turned sharply, and headed toward the legal department. Ava was already inside a smaller conference room when Langford joined her. The door closed behind him with a soft click. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ava stood by the window again, her reflection faint against the glass. The city looked the same as it had an hour ago, busy, unaware. Moving forward. You let him see the file, Langford said finally. Yes, that wasn't part of the plan. It is now. Langford studied her carefully. You are accelerating. No, Ava replied. I'm allowing consequences. There was no emotion in her voice. Not anger, not satisfaction, just decision. He's already asking questions. Langford said he should, and when he finds answers. Ava turned slightly, her expression calm. He won't find them where he expects. Langford exhaled slowly. The legal team is ready. The prenup clause can be triggered as soon as he files. I know. And you're certain he will? Ava didn't hesitate. Yes, not because she hoped he would, because she knew him. Ethan didn't wait for permission when he reached the legal floor. He pushed open the glass door and walked straight to the front desk. The assistant looked up, surprised. I need access to the acquisition property file, he said. Her expression tightened slightly. That file is restricted. I'm part of the integration team. I understand. But then pull it, he cut in, his tone sharper now. Or tell me who can. The assistant hesitated, then picked up the phone. Let me check. Ethan paced once, twice, his jaw tight. This was ridiculous. He shouldn't have to fight for information in his own company. After a brief exchange, the assistant hung up. Someone will be with you shortly. Ethan nodded stiffly. Minutes later, a man stepped out from one of the offices. Older, composed, the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice. Mr. Clark, he said, I'm told you have questions. Yes, Ethan replied. About the property file tied to the acquisition. The man gestured toward a nearby office. Let's talk. Ava sat down across from Langford, her folder now open again. Inside were copies, not originals. She never carried originals. Once the divorce is initiated, Langford said, the clause activates automatically. There's no discretion there. Good. But he'll fight it, Langford added. He'll claim he didn't understand the terms. Ava allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible breath. He didn't. That won't hold up. I know. Langford leaned forward, slightly. Then what's your threshold? Ava met his eyes. Clarity. For him, for me. She closed the folder. I gave him 3 years, she said quietly. That's enough. Ethan sat across from the legal advisor, the folder now open again between them. I don't understand this structure, he said. Why is that property listed under a separate holding entity? The man didn't answer immediately. He turned a page, scanning something briefly before looking back up. Because it's not a direct corporate asset, he said. Then what is it? It's part of a private trust. Ethan frowned. Whose trust? Another pause, longer this time. The man's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. I'm not authorized to disclose that. Ethan leaned forward. It's my address, I'm aware. Then I have a right to know. The man held his gaze steadily. Do you? The question landed harder than it should have. Ethan sat back slightly, thrown off balance again. I live there. That doesn't establish ownership. Ethan's jaw tightened. I pay the mortgage. The man's eyes flicked briefly to the document, then back to him. Do you? The room went quiet. Ethan felt something cold settle deeper in his chest. What does that mean? He asked. It means, the man said carefully, that the payments you believe are a mortgage may not be structured the way you think. Ethan stared at him. That house, he began, then stopped. Because suddenly, he wasn't sure how to finish that sentence. Mine? Ours? Funded by me? None of it sounded certain anymore. Back upstairs, Ava's phone buzzed again, a new message, from a number she recognized. She opened it without hesitation. He's in legal, asking about the property. Ava didn't respond right away. She looked out the window again, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Then she typed a single line. Let him. She hit send and set the phone end down. Because this was the moment, not the reveal, not yet, but the beginning of understanding, and once that started, it wouldn't. Ethan stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. I want full access to that trust file, he said. The legal advisor didn't move. That requires authorization. From who? A brief silence. Then from the beneficiary. Ethan felt his pulse spike. Then get it, he said. Set it up. I'll talk to whoever I need to. The man studied him for a moment, then nodded once. I'll make the request. Ethan exhaled, tension coiling tighter instead of releasing. Good. He turned to leave, but as he reached the door, the man spoke again. Mr. Clark. Ethan paused. If I were you, the man said, I'd be very careful about what questions I ask next. Ethan frowned. Why? Another pause. Then calmly, because the answers may change more than you expect. Ethan stood there for a second longer, then walked out anyway. Because whatever was happening, he was done being the last one to know. And somewhere upstairs, someone already knew exactly how this was going to end. Ethan didn't go back upstairs. He walked straight out of the building, the glass doors closing behind him with a quiet finality that felt louder than it should have. The city noise hit him all at once, cars, voices, movement, but none of it settled anything inside him. His phone was already in his hand. He didn't think, he just dialed. Olivia picked up on the second ring. "Hey, how did the meeting? It's not what I thought. He caught in." A pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't have control over anything yet," he said, his voice tight. "There's something else going on. Something bigger." Olivia exhaled slowly. "Okay. Then we adjust. It's not that simple." "It is," she said. "You find out who's making the decisions, and you get in front of them." Ethan closed his eyes for a second. "I think I already met her," he said. Silence. "Then, what?" He didn't answer right away, because saying it out loud made it real. Ava was there. Another pause. Longer this time. "That doesn't make sense," Olivia said. "I know. She doesn't work there." "I know. Then why was she in that room?" Ethan stared across the street, unfocused. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Olivia's tone shifted, sharper now. "Did she say anything?" "Not much. But people listened to her. That part lingered. People listened, not politely, not out of courtesy, out of expectation." Olivia didn't respond immediately, then quietly, "You need to get ahead of this. I am." "No," she said. "You think you are. But if she's connected somehow, and you just kicked her out," the sentence trailed off. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "She's not connected," he said, more forcefully than he meant to. "You don't know that." "I do." But the certainty wasn't there anymore. Upstairs, Ava stood alone in the now empty conference room. The chairs were pushed back, papers cleared. Screens dimmed. Only the faint reflection of the city remained in the glass. She hadn't left immediately after the meeting. She rarely did. She liked to see the room after decisions had been made, after roles had been revealed, after people had shown who they were when they thought it mattered. Her phone buzzed. Langford again. "He's asking for authorization to access the trust file," the message read. Ava didn't smile, didn't react at all. She typed back slowly. "Grant limited access." A few seconds passed. "Limited?" came the reply. "Yes." She set the phone down, because this wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about timing. Ethan needed to see just enough, not everything, not yet, just enough to realize how wrong he had been. Back on the street, Ethan ended the call with Olivia and immediately dialed another number. This time, it rang longer. When the line picked up, the voice was calm, measured. "This is Langford." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I need access to the trust file tied to the property." A pause. "Then that request is being processed." "I don't need it processed. I need it now." "That's not how it works." Ethan stepped away from the sidewalk, lowering his voice. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but that address is mine. If there's something tied to it, I have a right to know." Langford didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone was different, more careful. "You'll be granted partial access shortly," he said. "I suggest you review it before making any assumptions." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Langford replied, "that not everything is structured the way you think it is." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone. Again, the same phrase, the same warning, and still no answers. An hour later, Ethan sat alone in a smaller office, the file open in front of him. This time, it wasn't not completely, but parts of it were redacted, names blacked out, sections removed. Still, there was enough, more than enough. He flipped through the pages slowly, his breathing steady but shallow. The property, the trust, the payment structure, it was all there, just not in the way he expected. The house wasn't under his name, not even jointly. It was held under a private trust entity, the same one listed in the acquisition documents. He frowned, reading more carefully. Monthly payments, not mortgage. Contribution, allocated funds, directed through an intermediary account. His account. Ethan sat back slightly. "No," he muttered under his breath. That didn't make sense. He had signed the mortgage. He had gone through the bank. He remembered the paperwork, didn't he? His eyes dropped to the next page. A familiar date. The closing. And beneath it, a second signature, not his, Ava's, but not as Ava Carter, a different name, a longer one. One he had never seen before. Ethan leaned forward again, his pulse picking up. He read it twice, 3 times, still didn't fully process it, because it didn't match the woman he thought he knew. It didn't match the life they had lived. It didn't match anything. He flipped to the next page. Another reference. The same name. Connected to the trust. Connected to the holding entity. Connected to, Ethan stopped, his breath caught. because suddenly the pieces started to align. Not completely, not clearly, but enough to form something dangerous, something he wasn't ready to accept. His phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. He opened it. Before you jump to conclusions, you should ask her why she never corrected you. Ethan stared at the screen, then back at the document, then back at the name. His hands felt colder now, because for the first time, he wasn't just confused. He was starting to understand that the entire foundation of his life, his house, his position, his sense of control, might not have been his at all. And somewhere in the building above him, the only person who could explain it had already decided exactly how much he deserved to know. Ethan didn't see her again after that day. Not in the office, not in the building, not anywhere he expected. What he did see over the following weeks was everything else falling apart in ways he couldn't stop. The promotion never came. The integration team was restructured quietly, his name removed from key decisions without explanation. At first he thought it was temporary. A delay, a shift in priorities. Then the formal notice arrived, reassignment, reduced authority. Then, 2 weeks later, termination. The explanation was clinical. Performance misalignment. Strategic restructuring. Nothing personal. But Ethan knew better. It wasn't sudden. It had been decided long before he understood what was happening. By the time he tried to push back, there was no one left willing to listen. Langford had become distant. The directors avoided him entirely. Meetings he used to lead went on without him. He wasn't pushed out dramatically. He was simply removed. At home, things unraveled faster. Olivia stayed for a while. Long enough to see if the situation would recover. Long enough to ask the same questions he had no answers to. Who is she really? Ethan never gave a clear answer. Because he didn't have one. Not fully, just fragments. A name on a document, a signature that didn't match the life he had known, a room full of powerful people who had treated her like she belonged above them. It wasn't enough, and it wasn't what Olivia wanted. She left without a scene. Just a quiet conversation one evening, her tone flat, practical. "I didn't sign up for uncertainty," she said. "I thought you were building something stable." "I am," he insisted, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. Olivia shook her head. "No, you thought you were." She packed her things the next morning, didn't look back. His mother didn't take it well either. The social invitations slowed first, then stopped. The subtle distance from people who used to treat her with deference became impossible to ignore. Connections mattered, and somehow theirs had shifted. She never said Ava's name directly. But the bitterness was there. "You should have handled that situation differently," she said one evening, pacing the living room. "You let things get out of control." Ethan didn't respond. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure what control had ever meant. The house was the last thing to go. Not immediately, not dramatically, just formally. A letter arrived, then another. Legal language. Clear, precise. The trust that held the property had initiated a transition. He had a limited period to vacate. No negotiation, no argument, because legally, it had never been his. Ethan stood in the same front hallway where he had once thrown her suitcase out into the rain. The memory hit harder now, not because of what he had done, but because of what he had misunderstood. She hadn't fought back, not because she couldn't, because she didn't need to. He left 3 days later, quietly, with less than he had walked in with. Ava never contacted him, not once. No messages, no calls, no explanations. The divorce paperwork arrived through attorneys, structured and precise. The prenup clause activated exactly as written. Assets were separated cleanly. There was no courtroom, no dramatic confrontation, just signatures. Final, efficient, done. Months later, Ethan saw her name again. Not in a message, not in a memory. In an article, a business feature, a profile on a private investment group that had quietly influenced several major acquisitions over the past few years. Her name was there, not the one he had known. The real one, connected to the trust, to the company, to everything he had thought he was building himself. He read the article twice, then closed it, because there was nothing left to misunderstand. Across the city, Ava stood by another window. Different building, different view. The air was quieter here, clearer. She had moved forward, not dramatically, not loudly, just steadily. Her work continued, her decisions carried weight. People listened when she spoke, not because of who she had been married to, but because of who she was. She hadn't needed to destroy him, she had simply stepped back. Withdrawn what had never been his to begin with, that was enough. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. A new message. Another deal. Another decision. She glanced at it, then set it aside. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, not as someone testing a relationship, not as someone waiting to see who another person might become, just herself, and that was enough. Sometimes, the greatest loss wasn't money. It was realizing too late that you were trusted, supported, and quietly loved, and you chose to see it as weakness. If you were in her place, would you have revealed the truth sooner, or walked away the same way she did?